So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and to another battle I'm having to redo because of technical issues. We have ORTHANC, which of course is the centre of power for Isengard, and in a similar way to Hobbiton and the way I described that, I think ORTHANC is quite a difficult settlement for the defenders to defend, simply because there is a lot of surface area that you have to deal with, and the attackers are able to stretch your ranks quite thin should they choose to, and also the attackers can use skirmishes a little bit more to their advantage than they could in certain other battles, because of course you can shoot over the wall and there isn't a great deal of cover in these open fields within ORTHANC's walls. There are some makeshift choke points that the defenders can use, such as in between these two pits over here, and they can sort of use them as cover as well to make sure they can't be charged directly. Putting archers in behind them is always an option, of course, but it's not quite so easy to do this as it would be in a normal sort of siege battle where you have buildings and sort of walls to do this for you, whereas you can shoot over these pits, of course. So yeah, it's an interesting siege battle, and it is going to be a 4 versus 3. We'll go through the attacking armies first of all, starting off with the green army, and the player who sent me the replay, which I believe is, it's second pink. He's playing as Gundabad. Gundabad are of course a very potent force when they are being aggressive. He's got, I think, 3 units of goblin trackers at the front, or at least 2 of them. But looking at the formations, I would say it's probably 3 of them. And goblin trackers are the best archer that Gundabad can field, which on the face of it is not that great. But more often than not, goblin trackers are actually able to pay for themselves rather easily because there are so many of them, and they are also very cheap, so that the damage they can do is often piles up quite considerably during a battle, and particularly in a situation like this, where they can be potentially more useful than in most siege battles because of the open nature of the inside of ORTHANC. Gundabad could do very well for themselves with those skirmishes there. And just in behind them we have a unit of Gundabad Guard, of course, the upper mid-tier spears. Very resilient, not too surprising to see them. I think he's got another unit pushing the ram as well. Not often you see a unit of non-fodder pushing a ram, but most of his infantry is actually higher tier, so it might be a bit understandable. Got a couple of units of these witch-round pikemen as well. You're going to see them most of the time for Gundabad because they're such a good line holder, and particularly in a siege battle where they can really help in a choke point fight. And over here we have a catapult as well. Again, not terribly surprising considering it's a siege and you can use them to bring down the walls. He's also got some of his lower tier trolls. He's got the mountain trolls just to save a bit of money. They could potentially crack through the formations. He's got 2 units of those mountain trolls, so as soon as those choke points open up, if the defenders are a little bit lightly manned, the trolls are going to go right through the defences they set up. Got, I think, 3 units of the Guardians of Khandu, and again, these are really the centre to what make Gundabad so strong, in my opinion, because it's a mainline infantry unit which outclasses most others in its category, because even when you look at stuff like the Castamir's Chosen and the Loka Flagrim, they are comparable to the Guardians of Khandu, but the Guardians of Khandu have got significantly more men in the unit, and this really makes the Gundabad frontline numerous and difficult to break down. They're not armour piercing, and against units of genuine quality and AP units, of course, they can fall away quite quickly, but it is a real challenge to deal with quite so many Guardians of Khandu in a quick amount of time. And if you don't, Gundabad often end up wearing down your front line. Got a couple of units of the Blackwatch Legion, which again, in a siege battle like this, it's going to be something you see quite a lot, I think, because the ability to bulldoze through enemy defensive positions is almost too good to pass up. They won't get too many kills because their attack value is so low, but they will be able to withstand quite a lot of arrow fire. They won't go down too easily because of their very high defense score. Most of that is down to their shield, however, so it is worth saying that against sort of more highly skillful units like Elven Swordsmen, they might not be able to land too many hits and they will take quite a lot of damage. But nonetheless, their primary function will be to force holes in the enemy formations along with the trolls, and then the Guardians of Khandu and the pikemen will be there to make sure that those holes stay open. And then over here we have the Witch-round Blackguard, the General's Bodyguard unit with the Witch King riding with them. Very, very powerful single infantry unit, and in this sort of situation, if they get into a nice blob fight and they go relatively unnoticed, of course, they will do quite a lot of damage. So pretty standard Gundabad army here. We shall move over, I think, to here, where we have an enormous blob, Queen K playing as Harad, just sort of looking from on high because I can't really separate all of these units, but there are Demons of the Desert. There's several different types of Muhad units. There's Dismounted Serpent Guard, and there is Trollmen of Harad. There might be Champions of Nafarat in there as well, indeed there are. Also got a catapult over here, so several sections of this wall will be brought down. and also a couple of units of Southron archers. And if we look down here, we can also see the mighty Mumakil, which on a battle like this, honestly, the Mumakil might be quite useful, simply because on a normal siege, the danger is that they could get bottled up and not really able to go where you want them to. But in ORTHANC, there's a lot of room to roam, and they might be able to get some decent damage done. They're charging around us, particularly because two of the defenders are Elven factions. They might not have the numbers to slow down the Mumakil enough. Over here we have Twinkie playing as Gondor, just a single unit of Gondor infantry over here. I'm a little bit surprised that this army wasn't going to attack over here. But the attackers, of course, set up first, and the defenders didn't need to defend this section of wall, because it looks like Gondor is going for a little bit more of a support-focused army. They're going to be supporting the 4th attacking army, which we'll get onto in a moment. The general is actually in a trebuchet unit, which is interesting. The trebuchet will be able to shoot over the walls, of course, and a second artillery piece in the catapult. So Gondor going very artillery-heavy, and again on ORTHANC, maybe not the worst idea. And then going into this, we've got mostly just sort of standard Gondorian units. Like we've got the spearmen and infantry. There is, however, as we sort of force our way through the trees, a unit of Gandalf's retinue bodyguard, which is hiding at the moment. But that is, of course, a nice multiple HP Lancer unit, which is very tough. But other than that, it's mostly Gondor infantry and spearmen, as well as a few units of standard Gondor archers, a unit of veterans of Osgiliath, some Ramos Ekor garrison archers, and the one unit of genuine quality that they've got on foot are these shielded Fountain Guard, which are of course very, very strong. But it's a very support-focused army, and they are going to be backing up the attack of the 4th attacking army over here, which is Lothlorien, being played by, I'll just call him Marios69, because I don't want to do any disservice to the name. We have some Lothlorien spears, some Galathrim nobles, as well as some some Sindar archers, I should say, over here. So both of the high-tier Lothlorien units. Lothlorien axes as well, the slightly more offensive-focused unit. Some sword masters pushing up some siege towers. And then over here we've got a couple of units of, well, we've got Lothlorien axes and Lothlorien warriors carrying the ladders. These Lothlorien warriors, of course, being the two-handed axe variant, the AP infantry unit that Lothlorien have, which sets them apart a little bit from the other Elven factions. And then over here we have some Lothlorien archers, and they do have some hidden units. I believe they do have some Sylvan archers hidden around the place, which gives them a pretty heavy skirmish presence. Now, moving on to the defenders. The composition of the defenders will be all important, because they haven't elected to defend back there because Gondor isn't there. Harad could spread out, but that would be a problem for another time. We have the Dwarves of Erebor, played by Robin Dickinsonner. So we have some Ironfoot spears up on the wall, who are going to be defending first against Lothlorien. Probably not the best choice to have these guys up on the wall, because Elven units are going to be much more highly skilled than Dwarven units, and spears have got an additional malus against infantry, so the sword masters will cut through them. But pushing up the siege towers with the elite units might be a bit of a mistake. We've got more spears back down here. We've also got some halberds, which would probably be better placed going up against the forces of Gundabad, because Gondor are a little bit further away. But the most significant part of the army might be this crossbow firing line. I think we've got 3 units of Ironfoot crossbows and the Blacklock engineers with their additional damage and missile waves. They're going to be able to do a lot of damage, potentially to units that try and mount the walls early. And then over here we do have a couple of units of Erebor Legion units, which are going to be a little bit better placed for going toe-to-toe with the elves. They'll still lose, but they won't lose quite so badly. And then as we go back here, I think we've got some Ironfoot Pikes, which again, going to be pretty interesting to see how they do. And going back here, we also have the Elves of Mirkwood, played by Roger Das and Hiri Peng, giving some support to the Dwarven forces over here, which are going to be facing off against the Lothlorien Elves and the forces of Gondor. And we've got Muro playing as Linden, and we've got a couple of units of Harlinden Guard over here, so a pretty heavy archer presence, in addition to those 4 Linden archers as well. But a lot of forces over here facing off against Gundabad, which is understandable considering the numbers and the aggression that they usually bring to the table. And we've got some Aradirith Amon Lank from Mirkwood, as well as some 4 Linden archers over here. Probably not a good use of their time to go after the Goblin trackers, but against the stuff like the Witch Realm Pikemen, they'll do significantly better. And then over here we also have some Noldorin Guard from Linden, backed up by some Ironfoot Pikes. And then on the other side, it's the same thing. Noldorin Guard and Ironfoot Pikes. I would recommend the Halberds instead of the Pikes over here because of that armour piercing. But they do have some armour piercing over here in the shape of the Axe Guard of Erebor, of course, the 2-handed axe unit that has been with us ever since Vanilla, although not with exactly the same name. Some 4 Linden Pikes as well as the very scary Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Again, probably better against Harad or Lothlorien, but it remains to be seen how they'll be used and moved during the battle. Got several units of Pikes, Mithlond and 4 Linden, and some Harlinden infantry over here, so they've really stacked up quite hard, and the Mithlond Marines, and then not actually the Linden General unit, but they do have the Noldorin Horse Lords, which potentially could be useful as a defensive tool inside the walls. But remains to be seen how they will be used. And then finally we've got some more Mirkwood troops, the Megil I Erin. And then as we move over here, into some of the more, well, some Hiri Lung units, so again, some of the more heavily armoured units. None of the elves are, other than in Mladris, are particularly heavily armoured, but the hero units from Mirkwood certainly have higher armour values than the more basic units, and more so than most Linden units. But Linden do have the Noldorin Blade Masters, the multiple HP swordsmen, very, very deadly. And then as we move over here, we've got some more Mythlon Marines with their stylized shields and helms, and of course they aren't spears in melee like the 4 Linden Marines, but their javelin fire is a little bit stronger. And then we've got some Thurny Tower, 3 units of them, which are rangers, I believe, for Mirkwood with the body piercing. Then over here we have Thranduil's unit, the Iragwe I Nanwaith, which are of course the Elder Royal Council. Very powerful, not armor piercing or body piercing, but their base missile damage and accuracy is extremely high. The pride and joy of the Mirkwood skirmish line, and Mirkwood have got some pretty fine skirmishers. Some Hiri Ek over here, of course, the Mirkwood Spears, and of course some Hiri Orth, 3 units of them. Harad are going to really struggle with their basic units against the Hiri Orth. It's going to really take the Trollmen or the Champions of Nafaret to bring them down. Maybe some Javelin Fire as well. And it looks like we've got 3 more units of the Megiel I Erin. And then the final unit to pay attention to, I think, is another unit of Harlanden Infantry over here to help out Mirkwood. So this defence is quite interesting. The defending factions have got all manner of ranged tools at their disposal. They've got the long-range archers of Mirkwood, they've got the crossbows of the dwarves, and they've got the javelins and rangers of Linden. So it'll be interesting to see how the attackers can break through those long-range skirmishers, but they do have some skirmish options of their own, which potentially could either waste the ammo or directly challenge that, in the shape of Lothlorien, for example, or the Goblin Trackers, of course, being the former of those. But yes, it should be interesting to see how this fight plays out, and I will check the recording to make sure it hasn't balked again, and then I will see you on the battlefield. So after what has thus far been a very lengthy skirmish and bombardment phase, the first move in terms of a melee engagement is actually going to be made by the attackers. So Muro is going to be sending out his Noldorin Horse Lords to try and hunt down these Goblin Trackers. So, well, I will go up to 1 speed as soon as these little movies have stopped interrupting me. Yeah, that was a fantastic time for a movie there. But yeah, obviously this is not really what I would have done, because the Noldorin Horse Lords are very tough and sturdy because of their multiple HP. But compared to the other knights in the game, they will still fall away to this sort of pressure quite quickly, even from lower tier archers like the Goblin Trackers, because they don't have as higher armor values as some of the other knights like the Knights of Anuminos and the Dragon Knights have, and also they don't have a shield. Instead, they are a little bit more focused around being a bit more deadly, which means, of course, that over time, the pressure of archers like this can start to tell, and ultimately, even if they were to mop up all of these Goblin Trackers, that's only going to be breaking even with regards to the amount of florins spent, because the Noldorin Horse Lords are, of course, a very expensive unit, and they will be getting made more expensive in the next patch, as will every knight unit. Well, next patch, I should say, the hotfix. They will be increased to 1,500 florins rather than 1,300 for all the knights, I believe. And the Horse Lords are very good in most situations for Linden, particularly when they're backed up by their Javelin and Archer cavalry. But in this situation, it doesn't really matter what Goblin Tracker they go after, because if they engage one, the other 2 will immediately start to shoot them in the back, which means they're not in the best of positions here. And indeed, Second Pink, I think he realises this, because he's content to just let the horses run around within his archers, and he doesn't really need to commit forward anything else, although he could send forward the Trolls at this point to rear charge the Noldorin Horse Lords, which would finish them off pretty quickly. But ultimately at this point, the threat of this cavalry unit has largely been negated, and Gundabad in general are going to be more resilient to a cav charge anyway, because of all of the spears and pikes that they have available to them here. As more and more of the wall starts to fall, definitely an extremely long bombardment phase, which usually I'm not the biggest fan of from a viewer perspective, because they take so long and the frame rate tanks whenever you get near the walls when it's starting to crumble, for reasons that I'm still not entirely sure of. They're trying to get into the catapult at this point, but the catapult has already done its work, really. There's a couple of holes over here. They could still fire into the settlement, but with the amount of artillery pieces that the attackers have, it's unlikely that it's going to make too much of a difference. And at this point, the Noldorin Horse Lords have not really made too much of an impact. I mean, there are a lot of dead Goblin Trackers out here, but ultimately all 3 of the units of Goblin Trackers are still operational. And unless you're going to kill an entire unit of skirmishers or rout them off, it's not really going to be worth it in the long run. It's more pronounced with crossbows and sort of higher damage sort of units like javelins as well. But even with lower damage units like Goblin Trackers, it's still much more worth your time if you can destroy the entire unit. Now, fortunately, the General is not in this Noldorin Horse Lord unit, but even so, only 3 of them, and I think at this point he does actually retreat them all the way up the hill, just to try and make the Gundabad player forget about them so he can use them later on in the battle. But other than that, the wall still continues to be picked apart by the artillery, and I think we will continue to make a bit of a cut here because no one really wants to watch the frame rate tank and just watch the attackers try and skirmish down, because it's not really something that I can make too many observations on, and nor is it the most thrilling thing to watch. So I'll make another cut until the attackers are ready to move in. So finally, after a lot of faffing around on the part of the attackers, we finally have an assault into the settlement itself, and Harad are going to be moving in here with their Muhad Berserkers first, but they're going to be met by the Megal Erin. And of course, Harad, with all of their armor-piercing capabilities, they're not really going to be the most useful against Mirkwood. But even so, the high attack of the Muhad Berserkers should still lead to some kills, provided they're backed up quickly. You can see the Southron Archers getting a nice angle into the side of these Hiri Orth over here. But they should hold up reasonably well. They've got a high shield value, and also they are more armoured than most of the Mirkwood troops. Meanwhile, just as we are heading over there, as soon as these infernal short clips stop playing, we can start to get into a little bit more of a settled rhythm. We can see that Gundabad are just about ready to begin their assault as well. Lothlorien's army is just to the side of them as well. Meanwhile, if we have a look out here, I believe... Well, no, that's actually Lothlorien's troops. But if we have a look out here, you can see that... Roger that, I think maybe in a little bit of frustration at the fact that the attackers were being so skirmish heavy, charged out a small unit of Hiri Pang over here to try and shut down these Sylvan Archers, and unfortunately the Lothlorien Swordmasters were on station to immediately come and reinforce them. The Hiri Pang are good in melee, better than the Sylvan Archers are, but with the dedicated Swordmasters there, this fight is not going to go their way. Fortunately, however, there are some Axe Guard of Erebor over here, and with their high attack values, this might well turn around, but again, this is maybe a little bit too aggressive from the defenders. I can get their frustration at the fact that the attackers were so intent on skirmishing them down, but ultimately you do need to try and absorb that more so than just charging out individual units, because otherwise you're going to have a pretty bad time of it. Meanwhile, let's go down to half speed and have a look over here. This is what Gundabad are all about. Everyone's attacking all at once now, which at least is good to see. You can see that these Goblin Trackers are in the gap in the wall, firing into what looks like the pikemen, which again is a good target because they don't have shields. The Mythlon Marines were coming forward to plug up this gap, but the Mountain Trolls are already here, and that means that the Mountain Trolls are going to be able to get into these Mythlon Marines and start doing a lot of damage while the infantry pushes over here. The gate is down, but Gundabad are pushing all at once here. And the amount of damage Gundabad can do is going to be pretty key here, because Gundabad, I can't see them surviving to the late game if they push forward everything all at once. But they should do quite a lot of damage, particularly with stuff like these trolls, because, as I've said before, pikes don't do the best against trolls. It might seem like they do, it might seem like they should, but the animation of the trolls is enough to overwrite the animation of the pikemen, and the animation is what gives the pikes their strength. And over here you can see the other unit of mountain trolls is also coming forward. The Lothlorien warriors from their ally is also coming in to help out the trolls, and suddenly Linden are in a little bit of trouble over here, because this big power play from the trolls is not going to go the best for them unless they can bring them down quickly, and unfortunately for them the Mythlon Marines were caught in melee with them. Over here we can also see the Gundabad Guard at the front with the support of the Guardians of Khan Duma slowly but surely pushing through the defences over here. These pikes were in a sort of column formation, which is not really the best situation for them. But the Axe Guard of Erebor are in there, so the armour piercing should start to bite in a little while, and the Wardens of Elos Tyrion are also over here with their body piercing, and while a lot of those Gundabad units are heavily armoured, so the range of fire won't do quite as much damage as perhaps the Dunedain Rangers did in the last battle, they should still do a decent amount of damage. While over here you can see that Harad are also pushing quite aggressively, just as Gundabad are. They've got their troll men of Harad coming in here to engage with the Thurni Tower that are out of ammunition, and the Hiriyak. The fact that archers are out of ammunition shows just how skirmish heavy the first part of this fight was. Nonetheless, the Hiriyak should be able to hold back a single unit of trollmen, although with the Beast Hunters there, the additional firepower may well swing this battle. You can see that the Mumakil are coming in now, crashing through their own Serpent Guard, but the Megal Erin are certainly not going to be sufficient to stop the Mumakil, and I don't think there are any Javelins over here, which is not the best, because Javelins are extremely important in bringing down Mumakil, although it does look like the Mumakil are having a little bit of trouble trying to get through this gap, but now that they're in, they should be able to run around the interior of this settlement without too much to answer them. I mean, the fire arrows are being poured into them to try and make them run amok, which it will eventually, but they will be very resilient to this sort of arrow fire. And of course, if the Mumakil get a good charge off into the rear of these Megal E Erin, that'll be enough to flatten the entire unit. What is going on over there? You can see that the Serpent Guard have also really aggressively pushed for this wall. This unit of Hero Orth that was taking the arrow fire was pushed out of the way by 2 units of the Serpent Guard, but over here the Hero Orth are having a little bit more luck. Frame rate is not doing fantastically. You can see the Serpent Guard doing well against the Hero Orth, reasonably well. And are the Mumakil running amok? I'm pretty sure they do. I'm begging the attackers to stop making holes in the walls so that the frame rate doesn't tank. Well, the Megal E Erin are wavering, unsurprisingly, with the Mumakil just in behind them. The Noldorin Blade Masters are coming forward, but they're immediately being targeted down by arrows. And needless to say, the Noldorin Blade Masters are not the sort of unit you want to send into lower tier arrows and lose them. Might work at that. All of those men going flying. I think that's them running amok, actually, the Mumakil, based on how quickly they're moving and the herky-jerk of their animation. But yes, the Mumakil corpses are also solid, so this is actually kind of acting as a bit of a blockade now, which could work against both teams, because units can pretty easily get stuck on them, although I think it's going to be more of a problem for Harad. It does look like the champions of Nafarat are coming in and around at this point, though. And the champions of Nafarat will be sufficient to mop up what's left, because the Mumakil did a lot of damage to this defence over here. And there's also these Serpent Guard who are coming down off the wall to engage these Hiri Lung. And this unit of Gondor infantry has also come across to put pressure on the defences. Still, really, the thing that's most significant over here is the archer fire, although the Thurny Tower, with their body piercing, are shooting into the backs of those Serpent Guards. So this wall fight, which was going pretty poorly for Mirkwood, is now going in the other direction. I'm actually just going to pause it, and then we'll go upwards in speed so that we remove the chance of the frame rate tanking too much. So you can see now the Blackwatch Legion are being committed forward. It does look like Gundabad is having a little bit of an issue trying to break through this defence. So Linden has, for the most part, managed to stabilise their defence over here. There are some Erebor legionaries over here as well. And again, the Blackwatch Legion are at their best when they have support, because on their own they don't have the highest attack values and they can't really get much killing done. And I don't think Gundabad has much left to support them with. I definitely would have led the way with the Blackwatch Legion and then sent the Guardians of Khan Doom in a little bit later, because they can stand on their own a little bit more effectively than the Blackwatch Legion. Blackwatch Legion are taking some arrow fire. Something. And indeed it is these 4 Linden archers. Meanwhile, the counter-attacking out here continued. And it looks like they did some damage to the Lothlorien forces, actually, but then the support from the Gondorians came forward, and I think eventually the numbers are going to tell over here. The Dwarves aren't going to have the numbers to stand up to both Lothlorien and the Gondorian auxiliary forces that came forward to assist. You can see over there are some Witch Realm pikemen from Gundabad coming over as well, maybe to support. There's yet more bombardment going on, so the frame rate is still going to be tanking. And over here you can see these Erebor Legionnaires and the Ironfoot Spears are not going to stand too much of a chance against the Lothlorien Swordmasters. They are also being backed up by Gondor archers that are out of ammunition, just some fodder for the front to act as a bit of a meat shield for the Lothlorien Swordmasters. And then if we have a look over here, the Lothlorien axes up against the Ironfoot Spears. With the support of the Halberds, however, the Lothlorien troops will probably lose this fight over here. But there are also those Maethir Ilazgelen, and they are very potent javelins. They've got some high missile damage, although they don't have the best shot. Looks like they're firing into the back of these Erebor Legionnaires, which they do have a good shot on them at the very least. So things are going relatively badly for the defenders over there, but the defenders have been able to sort of bottle up Gundabad at this point. Most of the troops that Gundabad have left are relatively low attack troops. In particular, we have these Blackwatch Legion at the front over here, which they are very good at pushing their way through pike formations, but they don't really have the killing power necessary here to kill some of Linden's higher tier troops. They've also sort of got some Erebor Dwarves over here. They do have some forces here at the gate still. They've got some Guardians of Khan Doom and some Witch Realm pikemen. A bit of friendly fire going on though, but in the face of the 4 Linden pikemen and the Noldorin Guard, Gundabad are not really going to make the most progress over here. Meanwhile, let's go back up to 1 speed and have a look what's going on over here. Once again, we have one of those damnable movies. We can see over here there's a lot of routing actually. Some dismounted Serpent Guard. Those Beast Hunters are just getting out of the way of the fire from the Elven archers, I would assume. The Thurney Tower, which is still alive. The Aradirith Amon Lank, who have presumably used up all of their ammunition, pulling out their two-handed axes in melee, giving some support to the Hirti Lung, and those Serpent Guard are routing off. So it looks like Harad's assault is kind of grinding to a halt, and they're going to be relying again on their skirmishers over here. Meanwhile, you can see that the fight in the shadow of the corpses of the Mumakil between the champions of Nafarat and the Noldorin Blade Masters, so a clash of the Titans over here. Although the presence of the Iragwe Inanwaith will probably put this fight squarely in favour of the defenders. That was a lot of men that those Mithlond Marines just lost, which leads me to believe that the Demons of the Desert are over here. Indeed they are. So the Demons of the Desert are here, and counter-attacking into the Demons of the Desert is not something you would want to do under normal circumstances. And there are also those Muhad Beast Hunters. Harad have got a lot of nasty javelin fire that they can pour in, and the Demons of the Desert may actually be moving over here to try and get a good shot onto the Nanwaith and the Noldorin Blade Masters. Just holding them in reserve there. Again, a very potent unit for the attackers here, particularly seeing as a lot of the skirmish firepower from in terms of the archers has been used up by both teams at this point.
They have lost half their men.
And again, Gundabad are not going to be able to force their way through here, so the defenders will be victorious against Gundabad, but the initial push with the trolls caught them off guard a little bit, I think, and so there are a lot of these dead Linden troops over here, which that might come back to bite them in the late game. There's some Harlinden infantry coming around here. The Witchround Blackguard are over here now, though, and they won't go down quietly. They are being targeted by the javelins, however. There is a very depleted unit of javelins, and there are some crossbows over here as well. The Witchround Blackguard are the last bastion of the Gundabad forces. In fact, I think Lothlorien and Gondor are going to be the forces to swing this battle in favour of the attackers, because I do think the attackers are going to win.
To regain control of the castle is almost gone.
I don't know what the attackers are talking about there, but the Erebor Legionaries standing resolutely in the face of the Lothlorien spears, who don't have the highest attack values, of course, and these Gondorian spearmen and the Gondorian archers are out of their depth when facing up against sort of the more high-quality dwarven units. What is going on there? That was the Trebuchet from Gondor. So the Gondorian Trebuchet firing in, trying to get some good hits over the wall, but you can see that several gaps have now been opened up over here. And I would think it's only going to be a matter of time before these forces over here are overwhelmed, because they can't stack up too heavily on every side. And it was over here where the defenders were starting to struggle a little bit before, and indeed it is looking like things are going to go badly for them. The Lothlorien axes. These halberds are trying to resolutely hold the line, but ultimately there isn't going to be enough of them, and the attackers can ultimately just sort of force path their way through. Some Thurney Tower came over here to help out in melee, and their support is actually turning around this fight against the Lothlorien axes. Looks like the Maethir Ilazgelen have run out of ammunition, so they should be committed immediately to sort of keep this front alive. Because the attackers, this fight over here has become a little bit more important, I think. Well, there goes King Dane at the hands of a pikeman. Still the artillery comes raining into the settlement. There's some Harlinden Guard over here, these slightly more tanky of the Linden archers because of their shield. Taking a near direct hit there. And they're firing into those Sindar archers who managed to get into the settlement. And again, using the siege towers to get in and around, which I'm surprised more siege towers weren't utilised here. Seems like the attackers were much more focused on making holes in the wall rather than trying to take the walls for their own purposes. And considering the amount of skirmishes the attackers had, that might have been a more worthwhile thing to do. You can see these Harlinden Guard there. It might be enough of them to beat the Sindar archers, particularly with the supporting fire from those Harlinden Guard over there. Sindar archers are multiple HP, but of course as a Lothlorien unit, they don't have the highest armour values, at least not as high as equivalent units would. Over here, the Witchround Blackguard victory seems certain. They're still munching their way through several of these Linden units, and they need to shut down the Witchround Blackguard pretty quickly, otherwise the amount of kills they could get could really affect the late game here. There's the Witch King, being double teamed by a couple of units of Hirti Lung. Yeah, the Witchround Blackguard are definitely not the sort of unit you can send any old rubbish against and expect them to be victorious. Well, let's go and have a look at what's going on with Harad, because the javelins may well yet prove to be a bridge too far. And indeed, it looks like Harad are going to break through over here. You can see the Mithlond Marines being attacked by the Southron archers. These Muhad Beast Hunters still have some ammunition. And ultimately, while the champions of Nafarat were destroyed by the Noldorin Blade Masters and the Nanwaith, when the Demons of the Desert came in with the second wave, supported as well by javelin fire, this is going to be enough to send this fight in favour of Harad, and there is the Haradrim General with the dual sabres. yeah, the Noldorin Blade Masters, they are going to take their fair share of kills from the Demons of the Desert here, particularly if the Demons try to retreat from them. But ultimately, this fight over here should go in Harad's favour. There goes the Witch King, once again, just like the last battle, killed by some Hir'i Lung. And then over here you can see some Hir'i Orth that have come back over here. They were actually repositioned to the middle fight, but they've come back over here to try and turn this fight around again in favour of Harad, trying to mop up these South-run archers, which of course they will rather easily do, but they do still have some Beast Hunters and some South-run archers that do still have some ammunition, so these Hir'i Orth need to be very careful in how they... Oof. That was the Demons of the Desert. Blade Masters were distracted by something else by the looks of things. The two Hir'i Ek are coming in to try and stop that. There are some 4 Linden Pikes coming over here as well. And that was another volley from the Demons of the Desert. The Demons of the Desert, in terms of the ammunition they use, are certainly the strongest javelin, I would say, but they don't have as much ammunition as some other javelins. And also they're such a big target as well. Like, they're always going to be focused down in a 1v1 field battle, for example. More Hir'i Orth coming over here to try and help out what's left, but I still think Harad are going to win over here. It's not really going to be a particularly comprehensive victory for either side, regardless of who wins. Meanwhile, it looks like Gundabad are about to fall. Indeed, most of their troops are routing, so all of these defenders now are free to go to other points of the battlefield, which may well yet prove to be the defenders turning this fight around. You can see that actually the defenders are 1% ahead, which is a pretty significant thing. And you have to say that with the attackers having so many skirmishes, that could well come back to bite them in the late game if they don't have enough infantry to really fight back against the defending infantry. But over here you can see the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard. The Noldorin Blade Masters dying earlier on in the battle could prove to be a really costly thing, because the Noldorin Blade Masters would have easily beaten the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard in a 1-to-1 fight, but now the bodyguard are pretty free to go around and cycle charge whatever they wish, and the only thing that could stop them from doing that are the Dwarven Ironfoot crossbows and the Blacklock Engineers. You can see that Gondor is now flooding into the settlement, the Shielded Fountain Guard being the vanguard, and then all of these basic Gondorian troops coming in to follow them. These Harlinden Guard up on the walls are firing down into the Gondorian blob, but there are also still some Lothlorien troops, including some Sindar Blade Masters and the Galathram Nobles. The Harad General falls to the Noldorin Blade Masters, who are putting up a pretty fantastic last stand. But all of those troops that were victorious against Gundabad now need to do the same thing against Gondor. There is an awful lot of these Gondorian forces, and the Shielded Fountain Guard in particular are going to be a pretty difficult unit to take down. There are these Gondorian infantry over here. The Hir'i Lung are coming over here to fight against this Lothlorien force. Again, this is maybe a bit of a waste of 39 Hir'i Lung, particularly seeing as the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard is immediately going to rear-charge them. At least it looks like they're going to rear-charge them. It's a very tame charge. But Gandalf the White. And then over here you can see the Gondor infantry going to rear-charge these Ironfoot pikes, and eventually this choke point's going to fall as well. The Galathram Nobles, I think, are the one unit of attacking skirmishers that still have a lot of ammunition left as well. And if they get up onto the walls, this could shift pretty heavily in favour of the attackers. There goes the Bearded Elf. Linden's general falls in the same place the Haradrim general fell. So the two of them really cancelling one another out. The Noldorin Guard coming forward here with the support of the Mithlon pikemen. Shutting down those Shielded Fountain Guard is going to be difficult. The Aradirith Amon Lank are in there. And they'll do a decent job, they need more. There are some Noldorin Guard over here as well. The more heavily armoured Linden Trooper. But there are also Sindar Blade Masters backing up the Shielded Fountain Guard. But this is the unit that I would say, alongside the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard, which is still alive and charging around the battlefield into the crossbows, this is the unit that I can see being the match winner here for the attackers. The Galathram Nobles, they've got some very high base damage. They are not AP, but that's really not the important thing here. The fact is they've got an extremely accurate archer unit here with high base damage. Going after the Blacklock Engineers as well. They could fire into the blob very easily. They could do a lot of damage to stuff like these 4 Linden pikes as well. Shielded Fountain Guard defeat is a distinct possibility. They are being somewhat overwhelmed by the defenders who really want to shut them down. They are going to be reinforced by some standard Gondor infantry. I'm not sure how the defenders are going to shut down this Gandalf retinue bodyguard now, though. I mean, the crossbows are really the only thing. But the crossbows are being engaged in melee wherever they are. And without them, I think that the cycle charging is going to be too much, because archers are not going to be sufficient to break the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard. They are some of the most heavily armoured and shielded multiple HP lancers in the game. And then over here, the shielded fountain guard, holding down all of these infantry. Doing a very good job at distracting all these infantry, actually. And then you can see some Ramas Ekor garrison archers coming in to once again distract some of these defending units. The defenders have been stretched a little bit here, and you can actually see that the Megil e Erin wanted to engage the Galadhrim nobles in melee to stop them firing, but the Lothlorien axes were immediately committed to them. And of course the Galadhrim nobles wouldn't have died to the Megil e Erin anyway. And they're firing point blank, so yeah, this unit of basic Mirkwood infantry is going to fall away pretty quickly. Look at all of the sort of siege equipment that's been abandoned outside the walls. Some Gondor archers out there, some veterans of Osgiliath still alive as well. So you can see the defenders just sort of stacking up their skirmishers back here. There's some Ironfoot halberds, but the Wardens of Alos Tyrion still have ammunition, which is important as they sort of fire into the blob, and their body piercing could yet be important, but whether there's enough of them left or not, I don't know. There's those Gandalf's retinue bodyguard over here. The Ironfoot crossbows are trying to escape the Sindar Blade Masters and the Maethir Ilasgelen, but it's not going to work, I don't think. I think the Ironfoot crossbows are going to be hunted down. And then if we have a look over here, again, the majority of this has been stretching the defenders, isolating individual units. The shielded Fountain Guard, now victory seems like a certainty. They've really held their own against a numerically superior force here in the middle. They engaged quite a lot of troops, including Noldorin Guard and Aradirith Amon Lank. But now the Galadhrim nobles are going to be firing in here to the backs of these Forlinden pikemen, which is the juiciest target they could ask for. Very, very fragile. All of these Ramas Ekor garrison archers, they are now with the Lothlorien axes surrounding these Harlinden guards, so I think the defenders are falling apart here. It was looking for a while like the defenders actually could turn this around when they beat Gundabad, and when they sort of traded 1-for-1 with Harad, all of those units that were coming over here to help against Lothlorien and Gondor. But ultimately I think there was some individual units that the defenders simply didn't have enough left to deal with, and in particular I think the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard was always going to be that kind of unit. The charge bonus on them is extremely high, and the crossbows could have dealt with them, but the attackers did a very good job of engaging the crossbows and making them very difficult to use. And I think the Blacklocks were actually out of ammunition, because I think they got committed, or they at least retreated. Those Ironfoot crossbows still have some ammunition, so it's not the end of the world in terms of the cavalry, but at this point there are simply too many attackers, I think. Sindar Blade Masters as well, that final wave. They have very low armour, but they are very highly skilled indeed. And of course they should be able to, they'll easily be able to defeat the Wardens of Alos Tyrion with some Overwatch fire from those Galadhrim nobles. There are some Hiri Orth, so actually it does look like Mirkwood with the Iragwe e Nanwe. They do have some units which survived the encounter with Harad. So technically the defenders beat Harad. However, what is that over there? Some Forlinden pikes. The Nanwaith are no longer in peak condition, shall we say, and the Hiri Orth, they're a very good unit. But they're not going to be able to hold back this amount of troops. Some Lothlorien Swordmasters over there. The retinue bodyguard are just in the background. The Galadhrim nobles have just been firing into this blob over here. And ultimately the vast majority of the troops over here were Linden. And of course the Galadhrim nobles' arrow fire is going to be extremely devastating to Linden's troops. There's still some shielded Fountain Guard left alive. In fact, the Galadhrim nobles target the Nanwaith and Thranduil falls. This is pretty much it. All of the defending generals have now fallen, and it's only really a matter of time before the attackers overwhelm them. There goes the Gondorian general though. They're not going down without a fight. That means Haldir might survive a battle for once. Normally he always dies in a battle. Where is Haldir? Is this his unit? No, that's Lothlorien axes. Unless I'm just dumb and Haldir's already dead.
Our foe has lost control of the castle.
Indeed. These Hiri Orth over here be engaging the enemy. But some Ironfoot crossbows to back them up in melee, but at this point, I mean, it's only a matter of time. And the Gandalf's retinue bodyguard is causing havoc back here in the town centre. Those Harlinden Guard are spears in melee, so they might be able to do a bit of decent damage, but ultimately the The damage at this point to the defenders is pretty terminal, but it was a good fight in the end. It was pretty back and forth, all things considered. And ultimately, the attackers, with how skirmish heavy they went, it could well have backfired. I feel as though if the Noldorin Blade Masters were still alive in the late game, if they hadn't been thrown away, they would have been able to beat the Gandalf's Retinue Bodyguard with the support of the crossbows incredibly easily, and then the cavalry advantage and movement advantage would have been the defenders to use. And the rearcharging here, particularly into a lot of these sort of more basic Gondorian units, not the veterans of Osgiliath, but stuff like the Gondor Archers, Gondor Infantry, and Gondor Spearmen, would have sent them routing very, very quickly, and the defenders could have turned this around, I think. But as it was, the cavalry advantage in the late game was in favour of the attackers. Gondor was able to utilise them well, and these Galadhrim nobles also proved to be a little bit too much of a threat in the late game. They really didn't have an answer to a unit of this quality, either in melee or at range. And now some veterans of Osgiliath also coming in. Resilient unit in melee pulling out their shields. The defending army's not giving up without a fight though, despite the fact the outcome is relatively inevitable. It's a very close fight as well in terms of the percentages. The attackers are only 2% ahead after all, but it's the type of units they have left. I mean, a lot of the units they have left are made up of elites like Galadhrim nobles and some Lothlorien units and the veterans of Osgiliath. They've got a fair amount of standard Gondorians as well. What is this unit over here? Looks like some Harlinden Guard. They are going to be engaged in melee by some Sindar Blade Masters. Sindar Blade Masters have an upgrade model as well, which you don't actually get to see an awful lot of the time. Using their Kung Fu.
Our enemy has command of the castle.
These Ironfoot crossbows still have ammunition actually. There's not nearly enough of them left to affect this battle. There's some perpetually routing units in the town centre. That's a weird bug, that is. As the attackers move forward, I think we can safely move this up into ×2 speed. Those Galadhrim nobles though. Very bright gold. They are a very good unit, the Galadhrim nobles. They and the Galadhrim Riders, I believe they're called, the mounted variant, the Horse Archers, are definitely the two most scary Lothlorien units. The Karas Galadhon's Guardians are, of course, the multiple HP pike, but they are essentially just a very powerful pike unit. Everyone knows how to deal with pikes, more or less. Engaging them from the front is not something you really want to do unless you have overwhelming force anyway. Whereas a unit like this, it's a little bit more difficult to know how to approach them unless you have a unit that's just as good as them. Finding an archer that's just as good as the Galadhrim nobles is easier said than done as well. This is going to be it. These Ironfoot spears, I think, are going to be the last ones hanging on. So the dwarves are going to be the last ones fighting. Still more than 1,000 frames left. I mean, the defenders have really sort of hung on for dear life, despite the fact that this fight has always been going against them for quite a long time. Not the best charge there from the Gandalf's Retinue Bodyguard, but it doesn't really need to be. At this point, the lower tier Gondorians are being committed forward. The unupgraded Gondor Infantry and veterans of Osgiliath are going to be the ones to finish this fight. As we enter the final 1,000 frames. Good fight though. We have a look over here, it is going to be within 5%. And ORTHANC is a difficult map to defend, so I think the defenders, all things considered, particularly seeing as the attackers went very skirmish heavy and there wasn't really an awful lot the defenders could do about that, I think they did very well. Even so, the attackers have won, and lately the defenders have won more than the attackers have won, so believe it or not, it's actually a nice change of pace to see the attackers win. It's interesting to see the elves on the attack as well. They're a little bit more difficult to use on the attack because you've got less units that you can simply throw under the bus. But I think Marios62 here did a pretty good job with Lothlorien. Gundabad as well, despite the fact they were defeated, ultimately did quite a lot of damage. The defenders weren't really too prepared for that troll assault, and also the fact that they killed the Noldorin Horse Lords early on. It was less due to Gundabad's playing more of a bit of a slip up from Linden, but even so, that was a good catch. Harad doing very well as well, 1,700 kills, considering that was mostly against Mirkwood troops as well as some Linden reinforcements. Very well done. Demons of the Desert and the South Run Archers And those javelins really paying for themselves. The Serpent Guard doing a decent job against the Hiri Orth as well before the Thurney Tower got turned on them. Having a look at the defenders, Linden getting a lot of kills, mostly because they were the ones tying up Gundabad for the most part, so that's more men that they could have killed. And the Dwarves, of course, had to go up against Lothlorien, which wasn't really going to be a bounty of kills anyway. But having a look at the kills that Gundabad managed to achieve, having a look at their best unit, was a unit, yeah, the Goblin Trackers were the best ones. So again, a very cheap unit that ended up paying for themselves very, very easily. Very cheap archers can do that quite well, particularly against a faction like Linden. Mountain Trolls getting 106 kills so very quickly, because they fell away quite quickly as well, but they did damage while they were alive. And the Witchround Blackguard getting 103 kills, despite the fact that they were committed really when Gundabad's attack started to fall apart. So even in spite of that, they did a very good job. So yeah, that was ORTHANC. It's I like ORTHANC as a map. It's a different sort of siege. As the defenders, you've got to be a little bit more proactive with how you move your defence around and adapt it, rather than just sort of plonking all of your troops into one choke point and having the attackers try and wear you down. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed seeing ORTHANC. It's a map that WK, I believe, did change around a little bit, because it was very different in the past. I never played it before, but I do know that it wasn't as well put together as this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which actually I don't know what will be next.